Hey, this is editor Eric talking here. Just a forewarning for this week's episode. I had to record it in a different location than I usually do, so the audio quality might not be as good as it usually is. So just thought I'd give you guys a fair warning before you're surprised at what it sounds like. And hopefully next week I'll be back in my office where it sounds much better. But editor Eric out.
Hey there, bibliophiles. Welcome to another episode of From the Archives, a book review podcast where I talk about a book from my library and why you should or shouldn't read it. I'm Eric, a professor of anthropology at Cuyahoga Community College, and welcome to my library, or rather, my basement, because I'm actually recording this in my basement today and not in my library, but that's a story for another day. The books in my library are sometimes old, sometimes rare, sometimes normal, but always interesting. Every week I ask myself the following questions. Who wrote it? What's it about? What are other people saying about it? And should you read it or not? And should I shelve it or shove it? Should I can it or keep it? Should I reread or recycle? Should I jettison or set it in? In other words, should I keep it on my bookshelf or should I get rid of it? And if I get rid of it, should I put it in the book bin to offer up to you, my listeners, if you want to read it? With all that being said, let's take a look at this week's books. So this week, obviously things are a little different, so I apologize if the sound sounds a little different than usual. Again, I'm recording in my basement, and so I just decided to record in the basement today. Plus, I get the opportunity to work from my standing desk, which is always kind of nice as well. So the books we're actually talking about today, you can sort of see them if you're watching along. If you can't, we've got about 10 books that we're talking about today. And today's topic is Intro to Archaeology textbooks. So, surprise, surprise, a professor of anthropology is going to have quite a few of these. And I've acquired them over the years, kind of through just osmosis, I guess you could say. A lot of times what happens, for those that don't know, and this is how I would argue most of the books in my library have been accrued, is usually this time of the year. So this is being recorded the week after grades. In fact, this is recorded the day after final grades were due, at least at Tri-C. But basically, this time of the year, a lot of professors, when people are on campus and COVID isn't a thing, they'll have a book bin, and they'll literally just stick out a bunch of books that they're purging from their library, either their old editions, their teacher copies that they never ended up using, their books that they read but they no longer have a need for because the project they were working on is done. Any number of reasons that professors end up having a book but then not needing it for the future, and we end up having a lot of books. So they put out stuff in the book bin and offer it up to students for free. So, Ball State, University of Akron, Cleveland State, Kent State. I think I've done this at the University of Michigan as well. But basically, any university, you're going to run into this at some point. Whether or not, I don't think it's happening now because of COVID. I mean, maybe it is on your campus. I don't know. Tri-C's been pretty much remote for almost all of COVID. So I can't imagine this happens a lot. And plus, at Tri-C, we're not exactly the kind of faculty institution, at least not that I've seen, that puts out book bins. Long tangent aside, point is, sometimes at certain points of the year, it's like you can harvest books. You can go around and just troll the hallways of faculty, and you'll find free books or a bin that says free books, and you can pick them up and take them. Or sometimes they'll put out a table and say free books. I remember when I used to work at Akron, the political science department was catty corner to anthropology. And so sometimes I would walk over there and I'd find just a table full of books that were free that faculty were just getting rid of. So that's how some of the books end up in my collection. But also, because I'm a professor, unprompted, when you're a professor, people just unsolicited send you textbooks because they're like, please, please, please use our textbook in your class. You make crazy amounts of money if you're a textbook publisher. Now, if you're the author of these textbooks, you're probably making pennies on the dollar. Most of the people who wrote these textbooks, they can't say like, oh yeah, I wrote this textbook, I can sit back and relax, I don't have to do anything. Not the case with these textbooks. But for the publishers, oh yeah, they're big cash cows. So they'll send you textbooks for free. So some of these textbooks are a combination of textbooks that I got for free, textbooks that I picked up because old faculty, or not old faculty, I mean, I guess they are old compared to me because pretty much every faculty member is older than me. But point being, I've acquired them pretty much for free, just because that's the name of the game in being a professor. It's bonkers to me how expensive textbooks can be compared to other books. And in fact, I reviewed a few episodes ago an Intro to Archaeology textbook from the 60s called Invitation to Archaeology. And honestly, if you're just kind of generally interested in archaeology and you're not taking a course in it, I would probably, I mean, I guess I'm headlighting here and sort of, leading with the conclusion. But I think if you are not taking an archaeology class and you want to learn a little bit about archaeology, but you don't want the steep $80 price tag of a lot of Intro to Archaeology textbooks, you might want to look at getting either an old textbook, because the crazy thing is old editions sometimes can drop off precipitously in price. Either find an old edition of an archaeology textbook, or, Invitation to Archaeology, granted, maybe, I doubt I'm going to be making a huge demand or generating a huge demand for it because of my podcast, but, I've seen it on Amazon for like $4 or $5, and it's 150 pages. You can read it in basically a day. So I think you can get a lot of information very quickly out of the Invitation Archaeology book. I think it's really well written. I mean, sure, some people are probably going to say, oh, it's dry and boring, but that's archaeology. That's the name of the game. And so, if it's not interesting to you, then maybe that's telling you a little bit more about your interest and not necessarily about archaeology. And so anyway, let's get rolling into the other editions we got to talk about. And really, you could divide these sort of Intro to Archaeology textbooks into, I'd probably say, two categories. You've got your standard Intro to Archaeology textbook, which has, at least from what I could tell from the ones that I've got, they usually have the following components. I made a list of ones that I'm like, yeah, they probably all have something. They call them different titles and whatnot, but usually they're going to have a chapter about the history of archaeology. They're going to have a chapter or chapters about surveying and fieldwork. They're going to have a chapter about chronology and dating, so like how do we know how old something is. Usually going to have a chapter about taphonomy, so like this is the process through which artifacts accumulate in the archaeological records. So, things like river outwash, gravity, sedimentation, basically how the archaeological record forms and why some things preserve, some things don't. So usually a chapter on that. Usually a chapter on flora and fauna, so plants and animals, and what we can learn about the bones and remains of plants and animals. Usually a chapter on bioarchaeology, so, human anatomy, what we can learn from skeletal remains, what we can learn about human diet and subsistence based on, fossilized poop even, that kind of fun stuff. Usually a chapter on cognitive archaeology, so like archaeology of the mind, how can we look into what people were thinking in the past based on their remains, and then, how artifacts are made. There was some inconsistency here in chapters with world prehistory and historic archaeology. The textbook I use actually has a whole chapter for world prehistory and a chapter on historic archaeology, but we'll dive into the differences and why that's the main distinction, I think, between the two types of textbook. And so remember, we're talking about the standard intro textbook. Usually they're going to have a what's the future of archaeology. Sometimes they have a chapter on research design. Sometimes that's bundled into another chapter. And then occasionally they have one that talks about like historic preservation and being a good steward. Whether or not they talk about cultural resource management, which is largely, I would say, a US and Canada thing. It's a little bit different outside of those two countries. Granted, you could argue there's CRM in the UK, but just the laws and practices are different in other parts of the world. But obviously, I'm focusing in on United States perspective. So that's the view I'm going to give you. I'm looking at this from a US perspective. And so the second kind of book, and I've actually divided them up here. So these are all my Intro to Archaeology textbooks. So I guess before I move on to the second category, I have 2 copies of Archaeology Essentials by Colin Renfrew and Paul Bond. These are the second edition, and then I also have Archaeology Essentials, the 4th edition by the same author. So I technically have 3 copies of the same book. And again, just because one of them actually was, so the second edition of Archaeology Essentials by Renfrew and Bond is my original copy that I took when I was a freshman in college. So that's how I ended up with this one. And then I got another one from my old advisor, and then he gave me the fourth edition because he'd been using it for like a decade plus at that point. I also have Principles of Archaeology by T. Douglas Price and Kelly Knudson. I think the K is silent there. Knudson. Yeah, so those are my intro to archaeology textbooks. Obviously, Invitation to Archaeology I'd probably put in that category, but nobody is using that in their classrooms anymore. Even, because it's like 60 years old at this point. So those are the intro to archaeology textbooks. And then what I found is that there's this sort of subcategory that I'm not quite sure what the goal is of these books. It sort of feels like you would use them in an intro to archaeology course, but also a physical anthropology or human evolution course, but also a world prehistory course, but also like not an intro, but not an upper division course, like a middle road, like 200 or 300 or whatever you call it over there, 2,000, 3,000, and Tri-C. Like if you're a sophomore, these seems like maybe the books for you. I don't know. So these books are the world prehistory books is what I would call them. And you've got, let's see here, The Human Past by Christopher Scare, Scarre. Then you've got Physical Anthropology and Archaeology by Jolly and Plog. What a fun last name. Clifford Jolly and Fred Plog. Then you've got Images of the Past by T. Douglas Price, the same guy who also did Principles of Archaeology, and Gary Feynman. And then I've got two editions, the third and the second, of World Prehistory and Archaeology, Pathways Through Time by Chazin, or I think that's how you pronounce his name, Michael Chazin. So these books, yeah, they're a real head scratcher for me. And they're a real head scratcher because these sort of physical anthropology, archaeology books, I didn't really quite know what to make of them. I mean, certainly some of them had some fun illustrations, like the Jolly and Plog one is like, I think from the 80s. First edition came out in the 70s. It had some real like haunting graphics on it, like talking about Punnett squares and like genetics and recessive and dominant genes. It has this really creepy cartoon of a guy with different colored eyes. I don't know if you're able to see that on the video recording, but I mean, they just use brown and then presence absence, and it looks really creepy, like, I don't know, like a kid's sort of like a kid's drawing, like in a horror film or something of that effect. Yeah. So this is one example, physical anthropology and archaeology. We've also got, I already read all the other ones, but they kind of, it sort of feels like the inverse of the intro to archaeology textbooks, in the sense that we have world prehistory and the history of archaeology as the dominant sort of content, and then you get like little slivers of intro to archaeology textbooks. So you've got like a couple of chapters on like methods, on the history of archaeology, and then you just jump into covering all parts of the world. So you're learning about the archaeology of Southeast Asia, of Africa, of South America, of North America, of Europe, of Eurasia, the Caucasian steppe. It just, with these books, it really felt like it was going all over the place. They were trying to do too much in one book, like pick a lane, so to speak. And really, some of this stuff should just be in a human ev class, human evolution. Some of this should be in an archaeology class. Some of this should be in a special topic or upper division class. Like, I don't know, when I went to grad school and undergrad, you had special topics in like the Inca and the Maya, in Egyptology. If you want to learn about Central Africa archaeology, regions of the world had their own specific courses talking about those regions. And it just feels like these sets of books, like Images of the Past, World Prehistory and Archaeology, they're covering too much, in my opinion. Do I think that a lot of archaeologists, like people who go on into archaeology, should be aware of like Tiwanaku and Luxor or the pyramids of Giza, and know a little bit about Stonehenge? Sure, like, you know enough to be dangerous, but you're not going to go out and like, lecture some expert in archaeology on them. You know enough to, if you were sitting in on an academic conference, you'd be able to pick up on the broad brushstrokes sort of thing. But, does someone who's taking this as an undergrad who's probably not going to go on to be a professor really need to know all this stuff? Arguably not. I mean, obviously my perspective on these books is that I don't really know where they fit into curriculum. I think if I was teaching Intro to Archaeology in another institution, I would probably treat these sorts of books. I just don't know. I don't know where they would fit in. Like, I wouldn't want to use them for a class because there's just, like, I'm going to omit so much. Like, I'm going to just straight up be like, okay, these chapters we're not going to cover because we don't have time. Like, there's, like, one of them, I mean, the human past, this thing is heavy. It's like a brick. It's 700 some pages, and we're talking, let's see, how many chapters? 18, 20 chapters, and a normal semester is 15 weeks. So, you already have 5 chapters. Like, if, granted, this is me assuming that, and, correct me if I'm wrong, those of you who are also professors out there, but I tend to try to avoid giving students more than a chapter a week, just because it's already hard enough to get students to read. If you're giving them 2 chapters, unless it's an upper division class in an intro level course, you're not getting students to read more than the bare minimum, like a chapter a week. And honestly, people who structure textbooks and don't think about like the 15-week semester, what are you doing? Like 20 chapters? Come on. And so like I said, it feels like it's in no man's land because it's trying to do all of it in one book, and that should never be the case with the textbook. Like, anthropology has 4 subfields in the United States. It has physical anthropology, archaeology, linguistics, cultural anthropology. Each one of those gets their own textbook. Each one. I know because I have all of them. I have a linguistics textbook. I have a cultural anthropology textbook that I use. In fact, that's going to be next week's topic, is talking about cultural anthropology intro textbooks. Human evolution and physical anthropology textbooks. They all have their own lane and they stick to it because there's so much to talk about. It's just, I don't know, it's just doing too much. So I guess to kind of summarize here, because I'm going a bit long here, is I'd probably say I don't really have any issue with the Intro to Archaeology textbooks. In fact, I kind of enjoyed Principles of Archaeology. I think this one is our backup at Tri-C as an alternative to use. I might switch over to it. I wouldn't be opposed to it. I thought it had a lot of interesting material. The images on here were nice. That's the other thing, is you really, I mean, in this day and age, all of the Intro to Archaeology textbooks, unless you're one of this weird second category of like trying to do everything all at once, if you're just an Intro to Archaeology textbook, they're kind of cookie cutter at this point. You're going to have differences, sure, but a lot of them have like first-hand accounts of professional archaeologists. Like, give me like a call out of this professional archaeologist's perspective. I mean, all of these ones had, I can tell you, like, what are the greatest hits in an Intro to Archaeology textbook? You're going to have a fun diagram showing like a cow breathing in air and carbon floating around. You're going to show the carbon cycle for carbon-14 dating. And it's going to usually be like an animated or like a hand-drawn kind of thing. You're going to have a picture of Chaco Canyon. You're going to have a picture of Serpent Mound. You might have pictures of Newark earthworks. You might have a picture of, and I mean, this shows you how ubiquitous it is. This is the Birdman effigy that I'm showing. I have a copy of it, or a replica, I should say, that I picked up at Cahokia when I was there recently. But the Birdman effigy from Cahokia, that gets, put into pretty much all of these textbooks. Sutton Hoo. What else do we have? Oh yeah, Cliff Palace, the at Mesa Verde. You're always going to get something when you're talking about seriation from Dietz and Detlefsen. So, you're going to get the greatest hits in pretty much all of these Intro to Archaeology textbooks. Now, that being said, looking at Renfrew and Bond, edition 1 through edition 4, I don't know which edition they're on now. I think it's 4. I have flipped through these, and literally we're talking about like 5 sentences. I mean, it's almost a photocopy, edition 4 from edition 2. So when I say this, it's a racket, it's a racket. But yeah, my point is, I would say all of these textbooks, and again, check the Google Sheet to see all of the editions that I have. I'm getting rid of all of them except for the one that I use in class. I might keep the Principles of Archaeology textbook only because I think I might switch over to that one in my class. But otherwise, all of these textbooks are fair game. The intro to archaeology textbooks, I'd probably give all of them like a 4 out of 5. I think they're really good. They get the job done. And if you can find an old copy of Renfrew and Bond, I think I found one at least a couple years ago for like $25 because of the second edition. It's the second edition, so there's not as much demand for it. So $25 is much more reasonable for an archaeology textbook. Whereas if you want the latest edition, you could run you like $80, and that's where the racket is. Meanwhile, the world prehistory books, like Images of the Past, oh my gosh, you can really feel the weight of it. I would probably give these a 2 out of 5. Like, great reference material. This is not a page turner. I would never assign this in a class. And it's not to say that the content is bad. It's just the delivery is not in a format that makes sense for teaching. Like, what class am I teaching this in? I'm sure someone's going to write back to me and say like, oh, well, we have a specific course used for it. But it's just covering too much for one course. Like, pick a lane. Is this an intro to archaeology textbook? I mean, I'm not going to use it for intro to archaeology. Is this a textbook about a specific region's prehistory? No, it's all of it. It's all of it. Is it a physical anthropology class? No. It doesn't. I wouldn't use it for that either. So it's just, I don't know what to do with it. But yeah, I would give those 2 out of 5. So that's what I think about it. Let's see what other people are saying about it. So I've pulled up some Goodreads reviews. So let's start with Archaeology Essentials by Renfrew and Bond. This one only has 11 ratings, and it has a 3.73 out of 5. And it has no written reviews, which I guess isn't that shocking. I mean, we're talking about textbooks here. Textbooks aren't exactly something I think Goodreads is known for. And then if we move on, we can look at Principles of Archaeology. Now, what's frustrating, and this is something I do have to call out here, is archaeology, at least in the United States, and this is something that I think 2020 really brought to a head, is made up by a lot of old white guys, which obviously I'm foreshadowing that's going to be my future. I'm going to be an old white guy, probably an old bald white guy. Probably half of the authors of these textbooks are old bald white guys. And there wasn't a whole lot of diversity in how these books were written. There was, one female, Kelly Knudsen, but by and large, all of these textbooks are written by boomer white men from like the 40s and 50s. So that's something to address. These archaeology textbooks kind of give, definitely I would say the one with the female perspective has the most diversity and inclusiveness. Like there's talking about African American burial grounds, but it definitely gives off this vibe in a lot of intro to archaeology textbooks that like they're emphasizing the science side of things. And I can't really blame them too much, especially in the wake of the Trump administration. Like you really have to hammer down the science side of things, because if you even give an inch to sort of pseudoscience, aliens, the occult, it's just bad news. But I figured it is something that's needed to be acknowledged with all of these books. We have 11 authors, and one of them is a white female. The other are all white males. The reason that all came up is because when I looked up Principles of Archaeology on Goodreads, it listed the author as T. Douglas Price. It did not list Kelly Knudsen, and I don't know if that's just because that version just isn't on Goodreads, but I couldn't find it. So this one has 41 ratings, 3.95 out of 5, and I don't think it has any. Oh, it has one written review, and this is the only written review, 2 out of 5, and it's by May, and it was written January 13th, 2012. This book helped me realize that archaeology was not for me. I find it incredibly dull, and I had a hard time finished my assigned readings because 5 pages in and I would be fast asleep. Recommended for anyone that also has no interest in archaeology, but maybe is suffering from insomnia. It is a great sleep aid. Sure sounds like someone did not have a good experience in their archaeology class. That's one thing I will say, is that archaeology textbooks are not usually fun reads. That's probably why when I compared reviews for the sort of where does this book fit in world prehistory books, those ones seem to have more positive reviews, even among the negative reviewers. So if I flip over to, say, World Prehistory and Archaeology or The Human Past, this one has they have a 4.01 out of 78 ratings for World Prehistory, and then a 3.73 out of 5 and 222 or 221 ratings for the human past. And even among the bad reviews, so we've got here, this is a school textbook, yet it is full of grammar errors and comma splices, is what Austin09JJ says. And then this one is a 4 out of 5. The positive reviews seem a little critical. Good encyclopedia, not a good introduction. The general consensus seems to be among the reviews for at least the human past and for world prehistory is that they're really good encyclopedic knowledge. The content delivery just is bad. And that seemed to be the consensus, is that people enjoyed reading them and they loved picking it up and looking at them, but they did not gain anything in terms of, like, if I read this in a class, it was just a slog, having to keep up with the specific pace. So again, it just sort of, and I think there was one in here that I pulled out, talking about information overload by Siobhan, written January 28th, 2015. Siobhan writes, sometimes course books fail to give you enough information, whereas other times you are given an information overload. This book falls into the latter category. At the very least, it is a great reference point. If you're new to archaeology, I would suggest finding another book to help you work your way through this, as it is a bit heavy-handed at times, but once you have the general background knowledge, it is extremely useful. Still, it can be a bit daunting at first glance. Just know it is worth it. So I think that kind of summarizes it for me as well. It's information overload, and as an educator, you gotta know what you can deliver in a reasonable amount of time in a class. And at Tri-C, we offer 16, if you're counting finals week, 16, 8, and 10-week courses. I can't imagine trying to put the human past into an 8-week course. Like, 20 chapters. What am I going to do? Tell you to read 3 chapters or 4 chapters in a week on the history of, like, Africa, Southeast Asia, and Asia all in a week? It's just too much. So most of the reviews seem to be generally positive of the content, but not in the delivery. And I think definitely people who are generally interested in archaeology, that's where they're going to gravitate. They're going to gravitate to I want to learn about, like, all the old cool things. And I think that's the disconnect that a lot of people have when they start taking an archaeology course, is that no, like, I don't care about fancy shiny things. Are they fun? Sure. But we are not treasure hunters or anything of that sort. It's all about data, and it's all about learning about the human past. And that's just not sexy. It doesn't make for entertaining reading necessarily, unless you're really interested in data and statistics and theory. The review of Principles of Archaeology that one person said, like, great for solving insomnia, it'll put you to sleep. Honestly, that's kind of archaeology in real life. I just was in the field yesterday, and I spent 3 hours just poking holes in the ground and recording measurements. Like, to anyone who was looking at what I was doing, they're like, that looks boring, and that does not look fun. If you listen to a podcast, or you're doing something at the same time, or you have someone to talk to, it can make the time pass a little faster, but data collection isn't always fun. And that's sort of the bane of archaeology. So I'm going to be not shelving most of these. I'm going to keep the Principles of Archaeology and the Kelly and Thomas book that I use in class, but the rest of these are all going in the book bin. So if you want them, like I said, they're not bad books. I think they're perfectly acceptable. And in fact, if you could get a copy of a textbook for free or the cost of shipping, then by all means, go for it. But they're no longer needed in my collection of books because, like I said, once you have one Intro to Archaeology textbook, you've probably got the greatest hits. So that's going to do it for today's episode. I'm probably running a bit long here. Oh yeah, I definitely am. But next week we're going to be talking about Intro to Cultural Anthropology textbooks, and hopefully we'll have a little bit different perspective on what those look like as well. So until then, never stop reading.
From the Archives is produced by Eric Olson, and its theme song is Lukewarm Hazy by Asher Fulero.